On a freezing, snowy night, my 6-year-old daughter grabbed the hand of a woman shivering in the storm and said innocently, "Daddy, marry her, so she can be my mom." Neither of us knew that the woman we had just given our last bowl of hot soup to was the powerful chairwoman who had just taken over the entire city, and she was about to change our lives forever. The snow that night did not fall. It attacked. It came sideways in sharp white sheets, driven by a wind that found every gap in your collar, every crack in your boots, every place your body had forgotten to defend. The streets of Millhaven had emptied hours ago. Sensible people were inside, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, with warm things in their hands. Millie and I were not sensible people. We were just a father and a daughter who had nowhere to be sensible in. I had come off the night shift at the machine works at 9:30, hands still smelling of grease and metal shavings, back carrying the particular ache that only a 12-hour standing shift can build. Millie had been waiting for me at the gate the way she always waited. Small, serious, holding her backpack straps with both hands like she was bracing for something. She never complained about the cold. She had her mother's stubbornness in that way, and I had long since stopped fighting it. In my other hand, I carried a paper bag from the canteen, a single container of beef and barley soup, still warm through the cardboard. It was the last one. The cook had set it aside for me without being asked. Some kindnesses are like that, quiet, without ceremony. We were 3 blocks from home when Millie stopped walking. I felt it before I saw it, the small tug of her hand pulling sideways, away from our usual path. I followed her gaze. In the narrow alcove between a shuttered laundromat and a boarded pharmacy, a woman sat huddled against the brick wall. Her coat was thin, the kind designed for autumn, not for this, and it had done its best, and failed. Her arms were wrapped around her own chest. Her head was bowed. She was very still in the way that frightened me slightly. She looked like someone the storm had simply forgotten to move on from. Millie let go of my hand and took 3 steps toward her before I could speak. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was clear and careful, the way she spoke when she was being very deliberate. "Are you hiding a sadness that feels very cold?" The woman's head lifted slowly. Her eyes, dark, exhausted, and somewhere behind the exhaustion, sharp as cut glass, found my daughter's face first, then mine. I did not think. I set the soup down at her feet, shrugged off my canvas work jacket, and draped it over her shoulders without a word. No pity in my face, I hoped. Just one person acknowledging another in the dark. I placed the warm soup container into her hands and closed her fingers around it gently. She did not speak. Neither did I. The snow kept falling, indifferent and relentless, over all 3 of us. Millie had always seen the world in a way I could not fully explain. Other children her age saw strangers and looked away. Millie looked closer. She had done it since she was small enough to sit in a grocery cart, reaching out to touch the hands of old people, asking the bus driver if he was tired, leaving drawings on the doorsteps of neighbors she had never formally met. Her preschool teacher once told me, gently but with a kind of reverence, that Millie experienced other people's feelings the way most of us experience weather, surrounding, undeniable, impossible to ignore. So when she turned back to the woman in the alcove and reached out, slowly, unhesitatingly, and took her hand in both of hers, I was not entirely surprised. What she said next, I was not prepared for. "You should come with us," Millie said. Her voice was very quiet and very certain. "Our apartment is small, but it is warm." She looked up at the woman with those wide, serious eyes that had never learned to be anything other than direct. "And Daddy makes the heater work by kicking it twice on the left side. He knows all the tricks." The woman made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Something between the two. Millie tightened her small grip on the woman's hand. "Daddy," she said without turning around, "marry her, so she can be my mom. She looks like she needs someone to kick the heater for her." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. I opened my mouth, closed it, found words somewhere. "I am so sorry," I said quietly. "She says what she feels. We are still working on filters." The woman looked at me then. Really looked, for the first time, and something moved across her face that I could not name. Not amusement, though there was a trace of that. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief being gently interrupted. "How old is she?" she asked. 6, I said. "Going on 47. A breath escaped her, unguarded, real. She was trembling. I noticed it now, not just from cold, though certainly from that too. Something else ran beneath the shivering. Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. I reached into my jacket, the one now draped over her shoulders, and found the last folded bill in the inner pocket. $10, all that remained until Friday. I tucked it carefully into the front pocket of her coat. "It is too cold to stay here," I said. "Please find somewhere sheltered." She looked down at the bill, then back at me. Her lips parted, but whatever she intended to say did not come. Millie leaned up and pressed a small, solemn kiss to the back of the woman's hand. "I will look for you," she announced. "I remember faces." Then she took my hand, and we walked back into the snow. I did not look back, but I thought about her eyes for a long time after. Her name, I would eventually learn, was Maeve Sterling. But that morning, the morning after the storm, she was simply the woman I had not stopped thinking about, sitting in the back of a blacked-out car 2 streets from the machine works, watching the entrance through fog-laced windows. She had spent the night differently than I had imagined, not huddled in a shelter, not wandering. She had returned, quietly, efficiently, ruthlessly, to the glass tower at the center of Millhaven that bore her name on a plaque no one had thought to take down during the 22 days she had been missing. 22 days. That was how long it had taken her board of directors, led by her own cousin, to attempt the removal. They had underestimated her in the precise way powerful people always underestimate someone who appears, briefly, to be broken. By 6 that morning, 3 board members had resigned. By 8, the legal documents were signed. By 9, Maeve Sterling was chairwoman again. And by 10, she was standing at the entrance of the Millhaven Industrial Works, wearing a plain coat and a borrowed scarf, looking for a man whose name she did not yet know. She found me by sound first, the particular rhythm of my station on the floor, which a worker near the entrance recognized from her description and pointed toward without question. She stood at the edge of the machinery bay and watched. What she saw was this. Brandt, the floor manager, a thick-necked man who wore his small authority the way a child wears a Halloween costume, loudly and without grace, was positioned at the center of the aisle. He held a thin stack of papers in one hand, my pay envelope in the other. I had arrived 18 minutes late. Millie's fever had broken at 4 in the morning, and I had stayed awake beside her until I was certain, and then I had run most of the way. Brandt did not want explanations. 18 minutes, he said, loud enough for the floor to hear. 18 minutes because your kid sneezed? This is a facility, not a daycare. You want to play house? Do it on your own time. He dropped the pay envelope on the ground. Not handed, not placed. Dropped. Deliberately, so that I would have to bend to retrieve it. The floor went quiet. I looked at the envelope. Then at Millie, who was sitting on the small bench by the supervisor's office, where she waited on difficult mornings, her backpack in her lap, her face very still. I crouched down and picked up the envelope. Every bill. Carefully. Without hurry. I did not raise my voice. I did not perform anger. I simply gathered what was mine, what my daughter's meals for the week depended on. And I straightened up and met Brant's eyes with a steadiness that seemed to unsettle him more than any raised fist could have. In the shadows near the entrance, Maeve Sterling stood completely still. She had seen many things in her years of building and running and fighting for her company. She had sat across from men who commanded rooms with a single sentence. She had watched negotiators dismantle opponents with the precision of surgeons. She had never seen anything quite like this. A man retrieving coins from a concrete floor with the quiet dignity of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that his dignity was not stored in other people's opinions of him. She recognized him then. The jacket, the stillness, the way he turned instinctively to check on the child before he did anything else. Her hand found the wall beside her, and she made a decision. Brant had worked himself into the kind of anger that feeds on its own momentum. He had an audience, the floor workers pretending not to watch, the supervisor pretending to review a clipboard, Millie sitting very still on her bench with her hands folded in her lap. He had a target who would not react. And a man who will not react is, to a certain kind of person, simply an invitation to push harder. You know what? He raised his voice again, loud enough to bounce off the corrugated ceiling. I have been patient with you, Dane, longer than you deserve. But this 18 minutes, no call, dragging your kid in here like this is some kind of family picnic. This is it. Clean out your locker. You are done here. The floor workers went very still. Millie looked at me. I looked at her first, always her first, and I held her gaze for a moment. A small, private signal we had developed over years of difficult mornings. It is all right. Stay calm. I have you. Then I turned to face Brant. I had begun to speak, measured, prepared to ask for one conversation in private, when a voice came from behind him. Quiet, unhurried, carrying the particular authority of someone who has never once needed to raise their volume to be heard. That will not be necessary. Brant turned. Maeve Sterling stepped out of the shadow of the equipment bay and into the pale overhead light of the factory floor. She wore no badge. She carried no portfolio. She needed neither. There was something in the way she occupied space, completely, without apology, without performance, that made the room recalibrate instantly. Brant's expression moved through several phases in quick succession. Irritation, confusion, the slow, dawning recognition of someone realizing they have made a very costly miscalculation. This is a restricted floor. You can't just... My name is Maeve Sterling. Her voice did not change in temperature or volume. I am the chairwoman of Sterling Group. As of 53 minutes ago, Sterling Group completed its acquisition of the Millhaven Industrial Works parent company. All 7 facilities, including this one. She paused. One beat. Precise. Which means I am, as of this morning, your employer. The clipboard the supervisor had been holding hit the floor. Brant's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Your employment record will be reviewed, Maeve continued, in light of what I have personally observed this morning. Human resources will be in contact before end of day." She looked at him with the particular stillness of someone who has already closed a chapter and moved on. "You may go." He went. Not gracefully, but he went. The floor exhaled. Maeve turned, and the quality of her expression shifted. The precise, measured boardroom stillness softened at its edges into something more human and more careful. She looked at me. Then, before she spoke, she looked at Millie. Millie was looking back at her with the focused, unblinking attention of a child who is certain she has seen this person before and is working out exactly where. Then Millie's face opened, that particular opening, like a window being unlatched, and she said, simply and completely, "You came back." Maeve's composure, so immaculate, so hard-won, cracked, just slightly, just at the eyes. "I did," she said softly. She turned back to me. "The position of operations director is currently vacant," she said. "I need someone who understands what it means to hold a floor together. Not with fear, but with something that lasts longer than fear." Her gaze was steady and direct. I believe the man who gave away his last bowl of soup in a blizzard understands that better than most. The floor was completely silent. I looked at my daughter. She gave me the smallest, most certain nod I had ever seen. I looked back at Maeve Sterling. "Yes," I said. 3 weeks later, Maeve Sterling declined a gala. This was, by all accounts, remarkable. The Millhaven Winter Charity Gala was the social event of the season, attended by every name worth knowing in the city, photographed by every publication worth reading. Her assistant had called twice to confirm. Her publicist had sent a reminder with 3 exclamation points. She had replied with a single sentence. Something came up. What had come up was this. Millie had decided it was a baking night. I opened the door to find Maeve on the step, in a cream cable-knit sweater and dark jeans, her hair loose, holding a paper bag with the slightly uncertain expression of someone who is very competent at most things and genuinely unsure about this one. "She said to bring butter," Maeve said. "I brought 2 kinds. I did not know which kind." "Both kinds," I said, and stepped aside. The kitchen was small and warm, and already dusted with flour that Millie had distributed across the counter, the stovetop, and, somehow, the ceiling above the refrigerator. A mixing bowl sat in the center of the table. An apron, too large, hand-me-down, featuring a faded print of cartoon fish, was produced and presented to Maeve with great ceremony. Maeve put it on without hesitation. What followed was not elegant. Millie was an enthusiastic and deeply imprecise baker. Measurements were approximate. Instructions were interpreted creatively. The first batch of cookies spread too thin and burned slightly at the edges. Maeve, who ran a multi-city corporation and sat on 4 boards, stood at my kitchen counter with flour on her cheekbone and studied a misshapen cookie with the focused expression of someone attempting to understand where the process had diverged from the plan. "Is it supposed to look like this?" she asked. "Millie's always do," I said. "They taste right, though," Millie said firmly, and ate one as evidence. At some point, while the second batch was in the oven, Millie disappeared to the table and returned with a folded piece of paper, which she presented to Maeve with both hands. 3 figures. Crayon. A roof above them, slightly lopsided. Beneath the tallest figure, Daddy. Beneath the smallest, Millie. Beneath the third, drawn with careful, deliberate strokes, the name written large and unhesitating, no quotation marks, no uncertainty. Maeve. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the oven and the sound of snow beginning again outside the window. Maeve held the drawing for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the pocket closest to her heart.
Dear friend, the story you have just witnessed is a work of fiction, built from the truest materials we know, the longing for fairness, the weight of loyalty, and the extraordinary power of a child who has not yet learned to look away from another person's pain. The characters are not real, but the courage of a father who bends to pick up his dignity from a cold floor, without bitterness, without surrender, that is real. The ache of a powerful woman who has forgotten what it feels like to be seen as simply human, that is real. And the wisdom of a 6-year-old girl who looks at a stranger in a storm and sees not a problem to walk past, but a person worth stopping for. That, perhaps, is the most real thing of all. This story carries one quiet reminder. Never measure a person by the coat they are wearing in the storm. True wealth is not counted in accounts. It is counted in the moments you choose to stop, to share, to stay. Kindness is never a losing investment. Thank you for always choosing to be the kind of person who stops.